The age-old adage reminds us a good king should be able to meander amongst his subjects unarmed and unguarded. But let's be real. History is littered with tales of leaders who, shall we say, overestimated their popularity with the people. Take JFK for instance. He tragically discovered convertibles and public parades don't mix. Then there's the Vatican's approach, where popes are ferried around in bulletproof cars to prevent any divine intervention. Remember King Louis XVI of France? His grand carriage drawn by 6 horses was enough for revolutionaries to sniff out his not-so-sneaky getaway. And no, the drama that unfolded when Archduke Franz Ferdinand missed his turn and tried to back down the road, only to discover his assassin chilling at a cafe nearby, munching on a sandwich and loading a gun. Fast forward to our era of Instagram influencers and Twitterati, where revealing a celeb's brunch spot can cause an uproar. Hollywood A-listers are practically joined at the hip with their bodyguards. Even your average food delivery guy won't hand over your lunchtime burrito until you reveal a secret code. How on earth then did Adolf Hitler waltz into France, claim it as his playground, and parade down the boulevards of Paris without so much as a scratch? The man had more assassination plots against him than a series of Game of Thrones. But beneath this baffling conundrum lies a lesson in meticulous planning, strategic genius, and airtight security. The French resistance, as crafty as they were, couldn't lay a finger on him. It's a darkly ironic twist that the only person who managed to do Hitler in was, well, Hitler himself. So, what's the story behind the infamous photo of Hitler at the Eiffel Tower? Why did he risk his life to get this propaganda image? And why didn't the French resistance take him out when they had the chance? Well, it's time to learn how history works as we run down the play-by-play of how Hitler visited Paris without getting assassinated. Adolf Hitler understood the power of images. Born on April 20th, 1889, young Adolf had artistic inspirations that took a nosedive when the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna rejected him. Not because he lacked skill in architectural drawing, in fact, he had a knack for buildings and landscapes. But as human figures, they were as rigid and lifeless as a garden gnome convention. Undeterred by the artistic setback and fueled by a rejection that would make any art student's skin crawl, Hitler shifted gears towards politics. Growing up in Austria-Hungary, he was steeped in a brew of nationalist fervor, a common sentiment at the time, especially with peers of similar age. Soon, he found his true calling, not in sketching buildings, but in stirring up crowds with fiery rhetoric. Hitler cut his teeth in politics by stirring the pot in Munich's beer halls, which landed him in jail, his time's version of being cancelled. There, he penned Mein Kampf, a manifesto cum memoir which became the spiritual background for his eventual dictatorship. By the time he walked free, he was ready to climb the ranks of the Nazi Party, which was then a budding political group. In fact, the group would have probably have disappeared like many other small-time political entities. But Hitler knew how to get attention. Take that infamous mustache. Contrary to popular belief, Hitler's toothbrush mustache wasn't a fashion faux pas. It was pretty standard back in the day. Even Charlie Chaplin sported it, though with significantly more charm and less hatred. But its status as a fashion trend means that it was the equivalent of Hitler dressing like a modern-day TikTok zoomer. But what truly amplified Hitler's appeal was his knack for tapping into Germany's post-World War I angst. He promised to restore Germany's glory. Some might say he wanted to make Germany great again. His followers, a mix of the disillusioned and the fanatical, were like the Swifties of their day, except they rallied around swastikas instead of pop songs. Hitler's racial ideology added a veneer of twisted legitimacy to his claims too. He was the edgy outsider who said what no one else dared, a rabble-rouser who defied the establishment, essentially a controversial YouTuber, but with the ambition to control a country. Sure, there were naysayers who saw through his dangerous charisma, but with a fiercely loyal inner circle, Hitler kept his adversaries always one step behind. No doubt, the Night of Long Knives was pivotal in ensuring Adolf's first layer of security was harder to get through than a YouTuber's apology video. During a covert operation between June 30th to July 2nd, 1934, Hitler's inner circle murdered dissenters and rivals both in and outside of the Nazi Party. The highest profile execution was Ernst Röhm. Though he was an old friend and longtime supporter of Adolf, his ambitions to merge the party's paramilitary wing with the German army was a threat to Hitler's plans to acquire more power. With him out of the picture, rising to the top was easy. As he ascended the political ladder, especially after President Hindenburg's death, Hitler used every trick in the book, exploiting political crises, leveraging emergency powers, and bending the government to his will. Hitler was adept at carving a public image that by the time he invaded Poland in 1939, Hitler wasn't just a household name. He was a global phenomenon, a dictator who had manipulated his way to the pinnacle of power. If his previous antics hadn't put a target on his back, then starting World War II was certainly going to put him in everyone's crosshairs. Let's be frank. If you're watching this, you're probably a history buff. You've binged every World War II epic out there. Blitzkrieg tactics? Check. The storming of Normandy? Got it. Operation Valkyrie's explosive but futile plot against the Führer? Of course. You've seen it. You love Tom Cruise. You're practically a walking encyclopedia. You've even heard those quirky rumors about Hitler's flatulence problem and the rumored one testicle theory. Sure, that last one isn't true, but it's fine to imagine. But let's shift gears to something less Hollywood, more clandestine. Imagine Hitler, the most wanted man in Europe, slipping into France like a ghost. The scene is set. The Maginot Line, France's mighty wall of steel and concrete. It was built on the border with Germany during World War I, and now it's bristling with guns, primed to repel any bratwurst-loving invader. But Hitler, in a stroke of maverick madness, decides to crash the party through the back door, the Ardennes Forest. The Ardennes, dense, rugged, with snaking narrow paths, that straddles Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. Being spotted meant the jig was up, yet the tanks and vehicles would have to travel single file just to navigate the terrain. They were sitting ducks. A simple flank attack could mean the end of the Third Reich. Under a cloak of secrecy, the Nazis marshaled their forces, building armor and weapons in secret. Radio silence was the rule. This was stealth mode, World War II style. Then, the masterstroke. Diversionary battles in the Netherlands and Belgium. The stage was set. On May 10, 1940, the Panzer Division, Germany's armored fist, sneaks through enemy lines, a high-stakes dance of military finesse, while the Allies are distracted with the other attacks. And by the time they'd realized it, it would be too late. After all, every great sniper knows you need to fire not where your target is, but where they are going to be. So, by sneaking right under their noses, Hitler pulled off the ultimate bluff. Or did he? Was this a display of military brilliance, a 4D chess move from a military master, or was it sheer lunacy that just happened to hit the jackpot? The Allies would have to decide that later, because Hitler had caught them with their pants down. The Nazis sidestepped the Maginot Line, clinched a critical victory at a river crossing, and unleashed their armored might into France's heartland. The Battle of Dunkirk unfolded, a desperate scramble for the British, a tactical withdrawal to regroup and fight another day. For Hitler, watching his adversaries retreat must have been a sight to behold. France was now a fallen queen, empty of her guardians, abandoned by her allies, and now ripe for the taking. With Germany ready to play benefactor, installing a puppet government was child's play. For Hitler, the man who utilized the power of images to bring him to the cusp of world domination, it was time to take a bow on the world stage. Of course, Hitler couldn't simply stroll through the streets of Paris like he owned the place. Even though his iconic photograph in front of the Eiffel Tower was poised to become a cornerstone of German propaganda, securing this image was no small feat. It required top-notch security planning because, even in a weakened France, a single armed individual could shatter the illusion of invincibility. Having fought in the trenches of World War I, Hitler was no doubt thinking of Archduke Ferdinand when he anticipated his Paris visit, but he had time to think. Though the invasion of France had commenced on May 10th, it wasn't until June 14th that the German troops marched through the gates of the capital. Hitler's visit was scheduled for June 23rd, leaving a narrow window of just over a week to ensure the Führer's safety. That might seem like a short time for German forces, but they had to move fast before the French fought back. In fact, the airwaves carried Charles de Gaulle's defiant call for French resistance on June 18th. His voice, broadcasted over the BBC, ignited a sense of urgency. Would the French be able to seize this prime opportunity for assassination? The situation was now a powder keg, but for Hitler to cancel his visit would be to admit vulnerability, a blow to Nazi morale that was unthinkable. His visit to Paris was set in stone, and the SS and Gestapo were under intense pressure to execute flawless security. We now turn your attention away from our scheduled programming to bring you a message from our sponsor, Compounded Daily. Friends, each week there's a bundle of riveting tales that regrettably can't make their debut here, all due to the whims of the YouTube algorithm. But fret not, by enlisting in my brand new and absolutely free email newsletter, you'll be in the know with stories like the intriguing inception of a VC fund by our allies at NATO. This newsletter, dear viewers, will traverse the exciting worlds of finance, business, and economics, ensuring you're always in the loop. If the topics discussed here pique your interest, then rest assured, you'll find the newsletter a delightful read. It's not only enjoyable, but also enlightening, offering you fresh insights from yours truly, a seasoned veteran in the investment banking world. Becoming a part of our newsletter family is as simple as 1, 2, 3, folks. Simply use the link provided in the description, make your way to compoundeddaily.com, and then sign up with the email you use the most. True to their reputation, the meticulous Germans left no stone unturned. The Schutzstaffel, or SS, was a linchpin of this operation. Known for their brutal efficiency and chilling precision, they were the architects of suppression, but they weren't alone in extinguishing the flames of rebellion. Working in the shadows with them were the Gestapo, Nazi Germany's secret police. Their task was to intensify surveillance and intelligence operations in Paris prior to Hitler's arrival. Their targets were the emerging leaders of resistance, though in its infancy. The movement was more an idea than an organization. This disorganization played both for and against the Gestapo. The absence of a formal structure meant fewer trails to follow, turning their mission into a game of whack-a-mole. Consequently, a preventative strategy became paramount. The streets of Paris were to be a chessboard, every move calculated, every potential threat anticipated. The city, once synonymous with freedom and artistry, was now a stage for one of the most tightly controlled visits in history. In this high-stakes game, the Gestapo and SS were not just protecting a man, they were guarding a symbol, the embodiment of the Nazi regime. Failure was not an option. And so, as the world watched, Paris braced itself for a visit that would be etched in the annals of history, a visit under the shadow of fear and control. They bolstered their physical presence. The streets of Paris, once bustling with life and music, now echoed with the ominous click of SS boots and the stern gazes of Gestapo agents. These leather-clad symbols of oppression became a common sight, standing guard on street corners, bursting into apartment complexes, and arresting citizens at bars. They quickly implemented new rules to force compliance. The imposition of curfews and stringent regulations was swift and unyielding. These measures were not just about asserting authority. They were strategic, meticulously designed to hinder secret gatherings and the spread of anti-Nazi literature. We may never fully grasp the depth of fear and intimidation felt by the early resistors in the face of these German officers. Did the Parisians ponder, in the quiet of their homes, whether capitulation was a lesser evil than outright defiance? Can you imagine why some must have felt trying to assassinate Hitler now would be like throwing a stone at a hornet's nest? Though history would remember the valiant efforts of the French resistance in the liberation of France and their vital role in the Allied campaigns, at this infant stage of occupation, a centralized, organized rebellion was an unripe fruit. The German security teams had done a stellar job in preventing a concerted movement, but the fear of a lone wolf attack persisted. In a twist of irony, the Parisians fear the Germans, but the Germans feared a single person. It's one thing to suppress a movement, but how you suppress all individuals? They crafted a meticulous itinerary for Hitler's visit. Security experts, alongside the SS, were summoned to Paris, scouting locations, planning routes, and fortifying perimeters. The key was to minimize public exposure. Brief, calculated appearances at iconic sites, like the Eiffel Tower and the Opera House, were the only tourist stops the Führer was to make. The goal was simple: get the photograph and get out. The public was kept at bay, distanced by sharpshooters perched on rooftops. Every inch of the route was scrutinized for threats, bombs, traps, any sign of danger. Residents along the path were subject to severe scrutiny. A potential risk meant either a change in plans or the swift removal of the threat. But this also had its own risk. The more the SS planned, the more they made their measures known, or at least that was their fear. Who dared to raise a voice against this? The consequences of rebellion were clear and terrifying. Yet beneath this surface of enforced calm, the seeds of resistance were germinating. The Germans, eyes peeled for the overt act of defiance, overlooked the subtler yet more enduring forms of sabotage. The French resistance, like Hitler in the Ardennes, shifted tactics. They knew that the Germans were worried Hitler would be taken out. They were worried about the short term, so the French resistance focused on the long game, gathering intelligence, disseminating information through underground networks, establishing contact with allies. Their decentralized nature made them elusive, like a phantom network weaving through the cracks of Nazi control. Nazi presence in Paris was robust and dense with many moving parts, but the early French resistance were nimble. They were a small pack of lone wolves and Hitler knew it, and the French let him think that. Though the fantasy of a bullet ending Hitler's tyranny in their capital was tantalizing, the resistance recognized their limitations. Arms were scarce, their network too dispersed, and penetrating Hitler's fortress-like security was a suicide mission. Instead, they invested in building their infrastructure. biding their time for the inevitable moment when the Nazi grip would loosen. Sooner or later, Hitler and his men would return to Berlin, making it easier for Parisians to rise up against Nazi occupiers. Unbeknownst to them, the tide of wars was turning. Russia's impending betrayal of Germany, America's entry into the fray in December of 1941, and of course the D-Day beach landings of 1944, where Allied forces conducted the largest sea invasion in history. Though the resistance didn't know it at the time, they just had to hold steady. Putting all their eggs into one basket by trying to assassinate Hitler in Paris may have quashed the resistance before it got started. Ultimately, France was liberated on August 25, 1944, just months before Hitler put that gun against his own head. So, though Hitler had his moment in Paris, it was Charles de Gaulle who had the final triumph. His motorcade, parading down the Champs-Élysées, flanked by waves of cheering French citizens, makes for a better photograph. But what do you think? Was going through the Ardennes a power move or a lucky gambit? And if you were living in Paris when Hitler rolled up, would you have risked your life to end his? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to watch another video on someone who understands just how powerful optics can be, go and watch our video over on Rupert Murdoch. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how history works.